Hey everyone, and thanks so much, Matt, for making an amazing event and welcoming us here today. As Matt mentioned, I'm Ben, and I'm joined by Sheen. Just hands up, who's heard of Lego? We're going to get some hands up. Great. And who's heard of Alios? Surprisingly more than I thought, but great. So why are me and Sheen stood on the stage together today? Well, we actually both submitted the same talk without talking to each other. So we both wrote pretty much the same title and abstract, and Matt got in touch to ask, instead of giving 2 talks, why don't we do one together? So we're going to talk about enterprise serverless adoption and the essentials to do that. As I mentioned, I'm Ben. I run Alios, which is a consultancy that helps people adopting serverless. So my job is to go into enterprises and startups and help them in their serverless adoption. So I'm really going to be talking about the steps to serverless adoption, whereas Sheen is going to be talking about the actuality of what that looks like in practice. I'm also an AWS serverless hero, so I speak at a lot of events like this and work with AWS on the roadmap for serverless.
Right. Okay. Who was here last serverless days? Perfect. So that time, it was the day before the Valentine's Day. I remember I showed a slide and I said, there's plenty of serverless love around. We can clearly see between then and now, the serverless has grown, spread, so the plenty of love shown around the world. But also, so many other things happened between then and now. So we learn to live different ways. We learn to work in different ways. So even though it was like 3 years and few months, there's so many things changed. In the grand scheme of evolution of millions of years, it's nothing, right? But still, there are so many changes. So, oops. Yeah, so if we go back a few years, we had mainframes. Who has worked with mainframes? Oh, okay, plenty. So they are still around, right? There are financial corporations and banks and still kind of rely on mainframes. And then after a while, we got into virtualization. That really kicked off the whole evolution of cloud that we have. Now, if you look at the evolution of software engineering industry itself, this change that happened all the time, right? So people say that change is constant, but in technology, though, change is fast. Who makes this change fast? It's us. Because we demand more, and to satisfy us, technology evolution happens. When technology evolves, we demand more, and the whole, the cycle continues. Take for example, as software engineers or developers, we wanted our life simple, easy, right? So we ask for it. We have ChatGPT now. So that's how things go. But the point is that in this modern world, for enterprises to move forward, it should be in a position to accept change. Sorry, the clicker is not kind of coordinating with me. No, that's fine. So in terms of change, Dave Anderson, Mike, and Mark, they have written a fantastic book, The Flywheel Effect. So in there, they talk about modern organizations, how the innovation happens, and the power of change that triggers that, the flywheel effect, the cycle that keeps going.
I think we're jumping around. I might have to do it here.
Go for it.
Good? Okay, sorry. We tried a new clicker. It's not working well. So change is constant, and the flywheel effect is a really great book in terms of how you can align that change specifically in the example of serverless adoption in enterprise. But why are enterprises moving to adopt serverless, and what are the benefits of serverless? I know a lot of people have talked at this conference, as conferences in the past, about the benefits of serverless. But the ones that are the favorite ones for me are reduction in cost being able to scale higher with less work to do it, having faster development in itself, and enabling better experimentation with customer experiences. And there are many studies that have shown the differences in adoption of serverless compared to traditional architectures, and we see things like a 60% reduction in operational costs, a 71% reduction in unplanned outages, and my favorite, an increase in developer productivity. But if we look at other surveys, the picture isn't actually always as positive. The O'Reilly survey, and this is a couple of years old now, showed that the adoption of serverless in companies was actually partly successful, normally quite partly successful, in companies that were new to adopting serverless. So although serverless is this great utopia we want to work towards, what are the challenges that are stopping us from getting there? And I like to call it the Field of Dreams trap. Who here's seen Field of Dreams and gets this reference? Oh, I wish there were more hands. Field of Dreams is a film about building a baseball field and then people come to the baseball field. Works in the film, doesn't work with technology. If we just build something and expect our engineers to move towards it, it's rarely successful. We have to bring people on the journey. This is true of our customers and our users, but it's also true of the engineering team. It's not a case of spinning up a cloud center of excellence with great landing zones and amazing platform teams. It's actually a huge change to move people towards serverless, and you need to bring people on that journey. Handing back over to Sheen.
Okay, so early on, if you listen to Sarah's talk, she talked about what made Lego.com to change back in 2017. So behind, though she was kind enough to say, we used to deploy once in a week. That's not true. We used to deploy once in a few weeks or a couple of months' time. So these were some of the, the reasons why we wanted to make that change. Because cloud was just, gaining popularity, and the struggles we had those days with on-prem system and the deployment, the struggles and all sorts of things, and geared us towards preparing or looking for something new. So behind that reasons, one of the reasons was like change to serve better and bring, the service or the Lego products to millions more customers around the world. So again, the change was always there. Now, so we switched to serverless back in 2019. I've spoken this so many times. And this is roughly the architecture. So we have the split of the front end, they are run on Fargate, and the back end services are all or serverless services. So this is roughly the, the split. Now, if you look at this architecture, who thinks this is a cool architecture? Wow, okay. Now, maybe once it was a cool architecture, because if you think about it, it might have started off from a S3 bucket and a Lambda function. Then slowly, knowingly or unknowingly, it grows, right? So one after the other of the other. Now, at some point, you think that, oh, I got it, that's it. Now, your colleague walks behind you and he'll spot a SQS queue. And he'll say, buddy, don't you think that this queue needs a DL queue or a error queue? Oh, yes. Okay, so you add an error queue. Now, someone else will walk behind and say, now, who is going to look after the error queue? What do you do if some message has dropped into the DL queue? Oh, I need a Lambda to know when something dropped in here. So you add a Lambda, then I ask your colleague, okay, what do I do with a Lambda? You say, I don't know, it's your Lambda. Okay, then you think, oh, what do I do? Should I put the message back to the queue, or should I send to event bridge? And then somebody will say, oh, that's old style. Now we have event bridge pipes. So this is how typically such monolith, complicated serverless architectures grow when you start new with serverless. So this is where your thinking needs to come in. So these are all like tangled architecture, or as ThoughtWorks calls as the Lambda pinball, or I call it as the ball of serverless mud. So this is what we need to avoid when we move to, the enterprises start adopting serverless. And so to give an example, so this is marketing channels technology. So myself and other colleagues here, they all belong to this organization. So this is part of the higher digital tech organization within the Lego group. And MCT looks after three main areas. One is the .com, lego.com, and its operation. And then all the retail stores and the operations around the, the retail store business. And then, of course, the customer support center and everything related to the customer service center operation. But behind the scenes, MCT is divided into domains. So I just, for example, I show 5 domains, is more domains there. Now, the reason is for better control, better organization. Now, this is typical domain-driven design, right? So when you have a domain, the next thing you think of subdomains. So you split your domains into subdomains. When you have subdomains, you obviously have your boundaries or the bounded context, okay? So think of these, the structuring your organization or enterprise in this way means you have clarity, you have a defined boundary in areas that people operate. When you define a boundary, now you need to protect the boundary. How do you protect the boundary? You need people. So when you need people, you assign ownership. Ownership is teams. They own a boundary or a bounded context or a smaller part of the business, okay? And this is what typically you hear the 2 pizza, or depending on the appetite and the size of the pizza. Now, you have a team. Now it really makes sense to start thinking of microservices or applications. They live inside those boundaries. Once you have this, now it becomes clear that as part of protecting the boundary, you can now define API contracts, domain events, so that there is a clear separation between your part of work, your other team's part of work. So that really helps to move forward and easy to extend, bring in new teams, make changes, because you have the clarity in the development. So microservices come along, you have a number of microservices, all fine. But thing is, when you start serverless development, not all organizations going to have the expertise, right? So there is a bit of learning to do. Typically what organizations do is they hire consultants or get support from external sources. They bring in the consultants. That's fine. They assemble them, they form a team, they make a develop the product, deliver it. And what happens is, once organizations, got what they need, they just disperse the team because consultants are expensive, so they don't want to retain. Next time there's a new, requirement comes from stakeholders, they repeat the same process. The problem is, in many organizations, they don't transfer the expertise to their own engineers or members. So often you hear that the growth of an organization depends on the growth of its people. So if there is no people growth in that sort of situations, obviously you don't expect a team growth, because there is no team. Like you just bring in a bunch of people, do the thing, and then kind of dismantle. So obviously organizational growth suffers. Means if you are thinking of adopting serverless, there won't be a serverless growth either. So this is why it is important to spend time, build the team while you have the expertise around. So in terms of modern team setup, there are certain things that you need to take into account. For example, you need to give them the freedom. You need to make them owners of features or services. They will make mistakes, of course, but they will learn. So you need to kind of, you should be able to take risks and then trust them to deliver things. So these are all important aspects as we grow serverless teams in enterprise organizations. The other shift that we need to visualize is that these days Serverless engineers are not just programmers. They are not coders. Because, think of it, when you build a microservice, coding is just part of it. You're basically composing your service by using number of managed services from the cloud provider, right? So if that is the case, your serverless engineer should know more. They should know how to queue things. They should know how to secure the things. They should know how to throttle or, how do they authenticate and authorize and all sorts of things. These are all nowadays not specific to other specialists. They are all part of the serverless engineers, curriculum or culture. So that's why often I say that serverless engineers or serverless teams bring diversity into, the sort of the engineering into the team. Okay. So how did we grow? So back in 2018, we had 2 teams or 2 squads. Now in 2023, so we have over 25 or 30 squads. Because of the kind of the model or the template, it becomes easier to replicate. I know Sarah talked about, and Andrea mentioned this sort of team owning the accounts and the operating their own account, doing their deployments. So that way, it becomes really easier to kind of move forward, expand, and expansion means you are delivering more value to the business, etc. So another aspect as organizations move to cloud is cloud providers. Typically you hear this term vendor because vendor lock-in. I'm pretty sure that your cloud provider is worth more than just being a vendor. Consider them as your partners because of the same reasons you will be working with them to make your services, make your business grow. And that is an important differentiation that when we adopt cloud and when we do serverless, we need to, because when it comes to events or the high season and things like that, there is always a collaboration between you and the cloud provider team to work out what is the best setup possible. Of course, serverless doesn't need all the extra, attention, but still it needs to be, taken care. So that's where, the partnership comes in to give the necessary advice, the training, the verification or the all sorts of validation process and things like that. So, readiness for serverless, we should be able to accept change and know your domains and have the boundary so that it's difficult to mess things up. And growing your engineers is very important. And of course, these days you just heard the talk about sustainability. There's a whole area of sustainability best practices when it comes to serverless. What are some of the patterns we can use? And especially the awareness and the spread of knowledge across the engineers is important. And of course, get ready for the future as the journey, goes through.
Great, so we've seen sort of the end path of what you can achieve with serverless and how Lego organized to achieve that. But I guess we're not all as at the same point in our journey, let's say, as Lego. So a lot of my job is helping people move to serverless, and actually there's been several steps in that journey that we think are quite common across organizations adopting serverless. So we tried to write these down as a team and tried to share them publicly so other people can take advantage of them. Going through each of these steps, so I think the clear part, especially for enterprise adoption, is making sure there's a clear vision, making sure that teams are aligned towards that vision, and that's not just in the engineering side of the business, but also the business part of the business, the whole company as a whole, from the executive team down, all being aligned toward a vision of moving to serverless. Then we need to build KPIs that show the end ROI of a move to serverless, but not just leave them to be at the end of the migration or modernization, but actually pull them forward so we can see on a sprint-by-sprint basis progress towards them. Inside of this sort of step of vision, 2 things that are very useful, none of this is particularly revolutionary, is a clear business case for the move to serverless. But the Value Flywheel book that we mentioned at the start of the talk goes through Liberty Mutual, the BBC, and several other organizations move to serverless and shows the sort of key sort of KPIs and ROIs they put into their business case. So a really good reference for anyone looking to make the case to move to serverless. And then in each team, defining KPIs that feed up into that business case. Step 2, topology. So topology being sort of structure. Having the right architecture is key, so building sort of event-driven architecture with different independent services based off the bounded contexts is really key. But you need to match that with the right team topology. So that is the structure of the teams that you have, aligning those to those bounded contexts, and actually looking at things like team topologies, the book, to have the right structure of streamlined teams and platform teams. And with serverless, I think platform teams work best when they're a product to the other streamlined teams. I'm working with an airline at the minute, and one of the key things we do is use CDK to build reusable components. Those components are then used by the different streamlined teams in the different bounded contexts and aligned to different parts of the business. But the team creating those CDK constructs, they really treat that as a product that they're releasing, and their customers are the other teams in the organization. Inside of here, I think one of the key ways to develop the right architecture and event-driven architecture aligned to the bounded contexts is event storming, or if you're leveraging event bridge storming, as I like to call it, but really getting together with technical and business stakeholders, getting in a room with Post-it notes, and laying out all the events in your system. And it's a talk in itself, but if you look up event storming, there are some really good guides on how to do it. And that really helps you understand the events, which become the schema between your different serverless teams, but also the structure of the services inside your organization. Then aligning the right team topology. If you've read the book Team Topologies, it's a really good one for understanding. And I think with serverless, you can build really creative and powerful platform teams. Now, Sheen mentioned earlier his lovely view of consultants. But I think consultants, where they come in and build something and go away, is a really bad move. I think the key part to move to serverless is to bring in experts, whether they're internal, whether they're people that you hire in, whether they're external consultants. But the whole thing has to be to move the organization towards that new technology. And to do that, I think the best way is pair programming. Pair programming with somebody who's an expert in a technology and somebody who's from a different background or from a different technology, and exchanging skills. And in an organization, prioritizing time for training is often a challenge. So I think breaking out the skills of an architecture that you're looking to move towards in what I call a skills matrix, and tracking progress on those. So as an organization, you see, okay, we've got a gap on DynamoDB. We're going to bring in somebody to run a training on that. We've got a gap in this area. We're going to get some people to upskill and do some certification. Is a great way to show that value to the business and get time prioritized. So I think breaking out the skills for your architecture is key, pair programming with experts is key, but making sure that people are brought along that journey and providing psychological safety through a move to a very different technology is probably the most important part. Then moving on to the way you want to modernize towards serverless. And we're talking about modernization because in many cases for enterprises, there's a lot of stuff that's not serverless. So when we're looking to modernize that towards serverless, the key lesson I would say is please don't do it in a big bang. Don't take a huge e-commerce like Lego and try to turn it to serverless in a 2-year project that will turn on one day and magically work. You need to break it down into small pieces. Take a strangle a fig pattern and apply that inside of your organization. Minimum viable migrations, which is another talk I've given at Serverless Days and you can find online, is my sort of framework for doing that. So breaking down parts of the system into independent minimum viable migrations, which can be shipped to production and run in parallel with your existing system. And to do this, you can use techniques like eventification of your legacy data stores and micro front ends to inject a customer experience into a legacy customer experience are really useful techniques here. And finally, the boring word that every consultant puts on a slide deck, governance. But I think what's key is a modernization towards serverless is not just part of a tech domain. It's a big change to how the business runs and how it gets built for cloud and how it operates cloud. And the whole model and shared responsibility approach changes a lot of how organizations work with their cloud provider. So I think making sure that there is good governance across teams, but making sure that's not just from the tech team, but also bringing the business and the tech to work together on a modernization is key to get the time, key to get the resources, but also key to change a business to leverage cloud in the right way. So putting that all together, we go to vision, to topology, both the architectural topology and the team topology, training, having the right approach to exchange skills, then through minimum viable migrations, basically don't do it all at once, and finally having governance where we bring the whole organization together to see the joint ROI on a move to serverless. So in conclusion, enterprises are moving to serverless. We saw some of the reasons and some of the benefits, but we're seeing big logos like Lego and others showing that this path is one that enterprises can take as well as startups.
So in terms of bringing people to the journey, it's not just engineers or developers. We should be able to take the serverless message onto your stakeholders, They probably won't understand the nitty-gritty details of serverless, but at least as a technology enabler that brings more value to the business, we should be in a position to take those to the stakeholders in different ways, to engage with them, show them when you have a prototype or a MVP solution in place, just show them and then keep them, part of the conversations, or invite them for showcase and things like that. So that is really important to spread that news, because technology alone cannot succeed in an organization. You need both sides, the products, the engineering and the design and the business, all sorts of things should come together. Yeah.
And I think I've said it 4 times now, but please don't do a big bang modernization to serverless. It doesn't go very well. Take a progressive approach, and there are patterns like the Strangler Fig pattern or frameworks like minimum viable migrations to help put structure around that.
In terms of lessons, there are plenty of lessons around now, because as I mentioned, serverless has grown a lot. There's so many organizations bringing out with their best practices and their experience. You heard from BBC, you heard from DVLA and many other organizations. So there are always things to learn. I mean, of course, one lesson is not going to fit in every organization. So that's where you need to understand what fits best for your organization, how you can then transform the business and then reap the benefits of serverless.
And as she mentioned, your cloud provider is a partner on this journey. There are amazing developer advocates. Obviously, you've heard from some of them today, met some of them today. There are amazing people inside of AWS building some really powerful things. Amazing people inside of all cloud providers building really powerful things. So I think work with your cloud provider on adoption. If you've got an architect you're looking to move towards, ask them for their thoughts and their challenges. They are really happy to help people move towards serverless. You just need to ask for the help.
In terms of checking your readiness for serverless, it is kind of form of different things. Say, for example, you hear that serverless-first strategy, right? Now, that is good in a way of thinking, but what you don't want to do is you are sort of a head-first serverless, all dive in and do things. That's where some of the first principles I often talk about come in. So the things I mentioned about, thinking in terms of your domains and your boundaries and your team, APIs and contracts and microservices. And when you get to that level, serverless will obviously become easier for you to carry on. And that's when the event-driven architecture will come into the picture. Asynchronous nature of your solutions, you will be in a better position to identify, okay, which part of my service or application needs to be synchronous, which part can be asynchronous. Okay, if it's asynchronous, what are the services that we can use? If it's synchronous, how can I make sure that the latency and the performance and etc. are optimal for the consumer or your users? So these thinking and thought process will come in, and of course sustainability is a big issue and big subject. So these aspects will come in as we start assessing the readiness for serverless. On the other side, we should also assess the workload suitable for serverless. Like I heard earlier in talks, not every workload is suited for serverless. There are kind of workloads or business use cases, they won't fit with serverless. There's no need to fight against and trying to fit into serverless. Okay, so these are the the preparation or assessment tasks that we need to go through before we adopt serverless and make it a success for the organization.
I think we've got one more slide. Do you want to talk about, Sheen?
So myself and my colleague Luke, we are writing this book. So this is coming up early next year. So in this book, we go through pretty much from the beginning of serverless, and then how can you kind of assess your organization's readiness. It will talk about the patterns, best practices, and basically the development cycle for serverless, going all the way through implementation, testing, and sustainability, and how you keep up with serverless for future. There are things that you need to look into when you keep on growing, because the technology itself, serverless itself, is evolving. So we should be able to kind of keep up with the changes. So all discuss in detail in the book that's coming out early next year.
Great. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. Once again, thanks to Matt Lewis and the team for an amazing conference.
Yeah, thanks, Sue.